everybody. Thank you for coming today. As part of the IPFW Featured Faculty Lecture Series, I am proud to introduce the Department of Fine Arts' John Hrehov. I first met John in 1997 when I came to IPFW, and he was to me then and still is one of the best examples of professionalism. A friend, a confidant, and a mentor, always respectful and helpful. His teaching produces the highest quality student work combined with the human touch. So if students want to know about Rembrandt or the Ramones, he's well versed in both. Quotes from students that are very common are, "The instructor was fantastic and willing to help at any given moment. The professor was always willing to help. Aside from being accommodating and helpful, he was also had a wonderful sense of humor that helped me get through times when I was stressed." John artwork is exceptional and noted. Highly regarded New York critic John McCuspet, paralleling John Hrehov with Grant Wood, wrote, "Both Wood and Hrehov paint with a Delft-studied clarity, a kind of Flemish realist precision that seems to mock the world they paint while rendering it with excruciating respectful care." I'm happy to introduce John Hrehov to his work. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by showing my appreciation to Chuck O'Connor, the Dean of VPA, who nominated me for this award, and Chuck's in the background. Thank you very much. And Barbara Resch as well. So my appreciation. This talk is, I hope it won't go too long, but it's focusing on my work as an artist, and I primarily do painting and drawing. And a little background, I've been here since 1989. So it's quite a while. I've been here teaching primarily painting and drawing. And I can't assume assume all of you know what my work is about or what it looks like. And here's an example. This is a painting called After the Flood, which actually is owned by the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. And this is kind of a typical image of mine where it presents realist conventions, and I'll get into that in a minute, what that means. But something you may see in reality, may not, but realism is taken and embellished, and using imagination in color or in juxtaposing different images, trying to create something that's a memorable picture, something that's really going to stand out, and in some cases also create a statement. So After the Flood actually has somewhat of a reference to the biblical flood, but it could also represent something a little more down-to-earth or common, to even Fort Wayne in general. So as I said, I would consider myself a realist, and even that term realism is really broad. I mean, there are some painters here and artists in this audience who are realist painters and draftsmen, but they're all very different, and here there's a definition depicting subjects as they appear in everyday life without embellishment or interpretation. Now, that may be true. Here's one artist. This is an artist, Richard Mowry, who is a tremendous draftsman, painter, and a self-portrait by the artist, and somebody I admire, but somebody I'm also, I realize I can never really paint like Richard Mowry, because his work has a sense of the absence of the personality, as the way I interpret it. That he's trying to, in essence, hold a mirror up to nature and just basically show what he's looking at without much embellishment. Jane Lunn is another painter. Actually, she's a pastel artist. These are done in dry pastel. Has anyone ever worked in dry pastel? Dry pastel is known for being, well, it's dry chalk. We all use sidewalk chalk as kids, and it's very clumsy and bulky, but these are actually done with quite a bit of precision. But again, this term realism, Jane's work is, I would almost consider it hyper-real, because to look at every single fold, every single nail hole, every single detail is heightened. It's just absolutely heightened. It's even more than a photograph. And usually students, that's the ultimate compliment. They'll say, "Oh, it looks like a photograph." Like that's the greatest thing, to look like a photograph. Well, this actually goes beyond that. This actually goes beyond that kind of realism, and it's the artist's eye. It's the artist's eye perceiving what they're something in front of them, and depicting it with an attention to that kind of clarity. And I happen to know, too, that these are all done from observation. She does not use photographs. Wayne Thiebaud is another artist I admire and I would consider a realist painter. And coming out of the pop art tradition, using quote-unquote low cultural icons or cultural items such as pies, gumball machines, yo-yos. But anyways, Thiebaud is known for showing things that we're familiar with, but in a repetitious way, and the paint becomes much more of the issue too. In the previous two pictures, there wasn't much of an example of using the medium, and here in Thiebaud, the paint actually mimics the lushness of the meringue and the frosting. And actually, in some of his other paintings, you'll see that with cakes. I don't have any more examples. Will Barnett is a New York artist who I happen to know and admire greatly, and I would still consider this realism. So it's a pretty broad term, realism, from the first example to the last example. Will's work is very much about design. It's very much about organization. You can still recognize the figure, the cat, the space, but there's a beginning of abstraction. Things are being flattened out. Space is becoming compressed. And I've actually heard him say in a lecture once that you couldn't. He does so much preparatory work in his paintings that, and everything is so well balanced that you could not cut off 1 square inch of a composition without totally throwing it out of whack. So that's how much control he puts into his work. Now, photorealism. I wanted to say a few words about that. You know, I don't consider myself a photorealist, but photorealism is a genre that was primarily popular in the 60s and 70s, an image like this by Richard Estes, where the artist would take photographs, in this case New York City, and try to divorce themselves from any sense of paint or process. You know, it's very different than the Thiebaud, where you saw brushstrokes and you saw the artist's hand. Here, the artist wanted to be the photograph. You know, the artist wanted to take on the elements of the photograph divorced of any kind of emotion or any kind of personal touch. Same thing with Chuck Close. Now, Chuck Close, I might add, his more recent work over a 30-year period has abandoned any kind of a slavish adherence to detail, and his work has become much more painterly. I don't know if has anyone seen any of Close's later works? Some of you may have. One person. Well, Chuck Close, if you ever see these two, these are about 8 feet tall, and when you walk into a gallery, you're confronted with this handsome-looking gentleman, just staring at you, and you can see every pore. Every pore is visible, and it's alarming because it's like, you know, that's more than I need to know. Thank you, but okay, that's very realistic. Now, surrealism. Now, some of you may know about surrealism. It was a cultural movement founded by Andre Breton in the 1920s. And the use of subconscious, dream imagery, Freud's influence. Very famous image, Salvador Dali, The Persistence of Memory. So this is kind of a classic use of the vernacular of realism, where you're using landscape, you're using the clock, but obviously it's manipulated in such a way that it could only happen, let's say, in a painting or in a dream or in some kind of hallucination. René Magritte. Magritte is a very interesting painter because, you know, playing with scale, again, realist conventions, beautifully painted, but just how contacts and syntax is used changes your perception of reality. Now, de Chirico, Giorgio de Chirico, if somebody had to force me to say who was my favorite painter, I would say it would be de Chirico. De Chirico has influenced me probably more than any other artist, and you may or may not agree with this when you see the rest of my work. But there's something about de Chirico's work, the use of shadows, the use of statuary, the use of time of day, seasons, even implying things like wind and sound. There's a mystery and a melancholy to his work, and actually those two words come up over and over again in his titles. Like he has a piece called The Mystery and Melancholy of a Street. But de Chirico's work, and I can't put my finger on why it inspires me, but you'll see in my work certain elements of the shadow, the statue, the time of day, and things like this. So he's one of these artists who I can't look at without being inspired. So you may see remnants of de Chirico's work as I get into some of my own. Speaking of one of my own, this is one of my own. This is one of my paintings. This is called Above. This is an oil painting. It's on canvas. And it's similar to that de Chirico reference of statuary, of landscape. And in this case, it's devoid of any real person, so implying the individual by using statues, by using sculpture, by using found art or art objects, objects that are made by man, and implying that instead of it being a real angel, you can still communicate that sense of the earthly and the divine, what's below and what's above, hence the title, Above. And actually two time periods too. There was an essence of showing the classical with the columns in the background, and more of a suburban environment off to the right as well. This is another one of my drawings. This is called The Past Returns. So like de Chirico as well, with the use of light and shadow. And this is a charcoal drawing, by the way. And I do work in both mediums. I work in oil paint and I work in charcoal on paper. And one thing you'll note from this picture, and you'll see again and again in my work, is the use of bilateral symmetry, which is a dividing line, usually right down the center, or actually it is right down the center, and the two sides mirroring each other. But they don't mirror each other exactly. There's a sense of comparison. And why I'm obsessed with symmetry, I really honestly can't tell you why. And that's one of those mysteries of what makes up an individual's aesthetic. Over time, it just evolves. But I do find a fascination in symmetry where you force the viewer's eye to compare two sides. I had a professor once in Cleveland who said that all art is comparison. And I love that definition, because if you think about it, we're always comparing light against dark, bright colors against dull colors, near against far, and so on. You know, even up until this point, everything's been about comparison. So the fact of dividing something in half forces your eye to compare left and right. So it sets up a mini drama. Your eye is going left and right, looking for similarities and looking for differences. It's another one of my pictures that's in the de Chirico sense, The Long Way Home. And this painting is an oil painting. This is an image that it's even hard for me to put my finger on, but my intention, I can tell you what my intention was. And hopefully later on there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions. But I was thinking of how the past never totally escapes you, how you're always being haunted by the past, how as much as you want to try to dig things up or bury them, you know, you're always going through that cycle. So in this case, what's going on is the individual excavating the remnants of this individual. Is it the remnants of a culture? Is it the remnants of a person? Or are they trying to hide it, bury it in a clandestine way in the middle of the night, hence the lantern? So there's that duality in that womb-like hole in the ground. You know, so we're always, you know, in my opinion, there's always this sense of looking back and trying to either get things back that we lost or trying to get rid of things that we currently have. Magic realism. Now, magic realism, I've had colleagues tell me that you are a magic realist. So I had somebody told me I was a surrealist. So you are a surrealist. So I don't know. But magic realism was a term I wasn't familiar with, but it was actually a group of artists, primarily in New York. Sometimes they're called the New York surrealists. Artists like George Tooker, Jared French, and Paul Cadmus. And I learned about it from this woman, Barbara Adrian, who I rode the subway with her in New York, and she's considered a magic realist. She was born in 1931, and she actually studied with the people I just mentioned. She studied with Jared French, she studied with George Tooker at the Art Students League. She currently teaches at the Art Students League in New York. And Barbara told me about magic realism. She told me about people like John Wilde, who I'll show you in a few minutes. But it's the same idea where it's not quite as exaggerated as surrealism, but you can take realistic conventions and create pictures that are memorable, haunting, mysterious, and not fully give away the meaning to the viewer completely. And that's an idea that I'm very attracted to. I know some artists feel that the viewer should figure out a picture 100%. I have the opinion that the viewer should meet the artist halfway. That a painting is not a billboard. A painting should not leap out and tell you in a split second what it's all about. That it should force you to enter into it, to try to at least meet the artist and figure out what he's trying to say, do some digging of your own, and see what he's trying to do. This is a pretty famous painting by George Tooker, one of the magic realists who just passed away about a year ago. And these are, and I might add also that the magic realists were very classically trained. They were in love with the Renaissance. If you look at works like Tooker's or Cadmus, they were in love with the human figure, with classical Renaissance perspective, the use of linear perspective to depict depth of space. But in a picture like this, you know, it could happen, possibly, but it definitely shows an isolation. You know, this is New York City, the sense of people being paranoid, hiding from one another, cowering, and almost imprisoned. I mean, it's no coincidence that the bars on the right side of the picture plane connote prisons or people behind bars. So it's a very disturbing image, but they're beautifully done. If you see this, I saw this at the Whitney once, and he worked in a very traditional Renaissance technique of egg tempera. So hearkening back, as I said, to not only the use of perspective, but the technique of egg tempera, and they're just so lusciously painted and lovingly done that it's almost an anti-20th century aesthetic. Along the lines of magic realism is John Wilde. And John Wilde is somebody who is a wonderful artist who lived in Wisconsin, taught at the University of Wisconsin for years, and was probably one of the most well-known of the magic realists outside of New York. Because he was living in Wisconsin, he wasn't living in New York. He was considered somewhat of a provincial or a regionalist. Anyone who doesn't show New York is a regionalist. And I've had critics write that about my work. Oh, it's wonderful work, but he's a provincial. So, anyways, but Wilde's work, and this is, as I was saying, it's a believable environment, but you know, the animals, the self-portrait in the far deep space, and the nude woman running through. Could it happen? Maybe. But as a picture, it's very compelling to me, and I think that with the magic realism too, there's a bit of playfulness too. There's also a poignancy. Wilde, I actually got to know John Wilde. I corresponded with him for a number of years, and went to visit him actually. And I have a picture of that in a few minutes. This one, I believe it's a giant kohlrabi, and you can see the figure. I think it's the artist at the bottom right, beneath the giant kohlrabi, lovingly done, but in a context that can only happen in a picture. It can only happen in a drawing. Now, as I mentioned, I corresponded with Wilde, and here I am in 2002. Actually, Bob Schrader, who's here, Bob studied with Wilde. He took a drawing class with him, and I don't remember how long ago that was. 1973. And Bob and I we drove up to Wisconsin, just outside of Madison, and it was a wonderful experience. We got to meet with John and see his studio. He was very gracious, and here's a picture of me inside his studio. So that's another thing. One of my major inspirations is art and other artists. You know, that's why I'm fond of my colleagues and fond of museums. And so when you can correspond with someone and get to meet them that you've admired for a number of years, it's quite an experience, quite an opportunity. This is another one of Wilde's pieces. And John passed away in 2006. So as a tribute to him, I did this little painting. He was fond of birds. Actually, when we visited his home, he had a large window with a patio, and I think there were hundreds of birds outside. And how much bird feed did he go through? Yeah, I think he went through 100 pounds of bird feed a week, or 50 pounds of bird feed a week. He was just feeding birds, and he loved them that much. And so this is my little tribute to Wilde. Obviously, the the scroll in the previous painting, the use of scrolls, floating scrolls to depict references or words, and here it's carrying his name into the wind and into the sunset. So it's my tribute to John Wilde. Now, toys are another influence to me, and there was a period in my life where I was doing still lifes, and anyone who's painted still lifes or has taken a studio class knows how dull it can be to paint an apple or a pear, you know, and you just say that to students and their eyes just glaze over, like, oh. A vase. Any of my students here? A bowling pin. This guy's excited about it over there. And I'll show you in a few minutes where that comes from. But you know, this fascination with toys comes from my past. So this is actually a photograph from the 60s of me with my 2 Casper dolls, who I was very proud of. And this, I believe, was Christmas time. So I was swapping out Casper dolls. The one on the right was the old one. You can see he's dirty, he's worn out. Did anyone have one of these by any chance? No one would. You did? Oh, good. Too. You pulled the string, and he actually spoke. He said several things. And the one on the left or on my right is the brand spanking new Casper doll. So, and I've always had this affinity since then of toys, and you know, they take on a life of their own, and there's an emotional connection. So much so that I did a portrait of Milo Casper. So it was a loving portrait. It was a straightforward portrait of Casper, the friendly ghost. And I still have him, by the way. And this is a painting, actually, of my daughter called Friend, where it echoes back to that portrait of me as a child, where she's holding this creature from the Black Lagoon doll. And actually, with this picture, I was thinking more so of the whole idea of what our children choose to hold dear to them, and there's a lot of parental paranoia in this picture. Anyone who's a parent, you're afraid of what they're going to latch onto, who they're going to bring home. You know, she's going to be 13. Who she's going to marry. So, you know, just the idea of clutching, of holding on to the child. You know, friend. Is it really? Is it your friend? It's not my friend. And so that's why I intentionally left her head off, which I'm reminded of constantly, I might add, by my daughter, you know. Why did you take my head off the tree? But the idea of toys, too, as I mentioned, I would go to this flea market. I found the flea market to be a great source of inspiration. And there was a flea market here in town. It still exists, the Speedway Flea Market. I don't know if anyone had ever been there. It's changed. It's still in existence now. It had a period where it was alive and vibrant, and then it stopped. And it was a very fertile place. And what I found, and it was in the spirit of the surrealists too, I would walk through and just look at objects and say, oh, that reminds me of this, or this reminds me of that. And the surrealists actually did that as well. The surrealists would frequent the Paris flea market to find objects, you know, Man Ray. So when I found this toy horse, I was actually thinking, the way my mind works, I was thinking of art historical references, and I was thinking of the Tang horse. Now, Tang horses from the Tang Dynasty in China are one of my favorite works of sculpture. And I have some references later on of Cleveland in the Cleveland Museum of Art. But I did think of the Tang horse, setting it up on a pedestal. And I was also working from observation, too. As I was teaching my drawing class, there was an effort to set these things up and just really depict them as they are, you know, to see if I could really do it. So that is the reference to that. This is another piece from that period called Sanctuary, which was similar, where I found these toy birds, and I set them up, and they started to move. They started to have this motion to them, or this animation. But when I did this, I was consciously aware of this piece, and it's a tribute to Will Barnett, again, a New York artist, somebody I know and admire a great deal. But I was thinking of this piece, and I wanted to see if I could combine the two. And not everyone knows that. If you saw this painting, you wouldn't know that it was a reference to the Barnett. But these are just little plastic, cheap little plastic model kits. I think they were made in the 50s. And setting them up, arranging them, and trying to create some sense of movement or flow was the intention. Same thing with this one, Shelter. I found a plastic deer and set it up in such a way. But I was inspired by this piece. Again, you wouldn't know that, but this is a pen and ink drawing that's in the Metropolitan by David Palsicor. And it's from Isaiah, I believe, a refuge from the storm, a shadow from the heat. But using the toy as a reference, or using it as something to look at and paint, and then in my mind, I was thinking of this image and how it inspired me. Now, some of you may have had one of these. You may not have had a Casper, but did anyone have one of these? Visible Man. They still make these, believe it or not. They still make these. Visible Man. When I found the Visible Man, I thought, you've got to be out of your mind to try to paint this thing. Well, that's a challenge, you know. That's a challenge right there. And again, you know, I hate to be a broken record, but I was thinking of several things. I was thinking of something like a resurrection. I wanted to show a resurrection scene, you know, hence the empty box. But in reality, I was thinking of this painting. I was thinking of Bellini's St. Francis in Ecstasy, because the pose is almost identical. If you look at the hands out, you can't help but think of St. Francis at the bottom. And this painting, if anyone's been to the Frick in New York, this is just an amazing picture. And, well, the Frick is an amazing place to be, period. But I was thinking of this and referencing it in my mind only, you know. And sometimes that's what it takes. What keeps you going? Because if a painting takes several months to do, there has to be some inspiration, something to keep you going, something to keep you working on it. And probably the battle royale, the final piece of this period, was taking all these plastic animals I'd accumulated over years and just setting them up and just saying, have at it. And just doing this painting called Footstool, where it's kind of a, it's not really a stampede, but it's a, all, be a very short stampede. But they're all just laid out there and put on the footstool and painted, I think in a loving way. And it does harken back to T-Bode, you know, T-Bode's influence. Now, Cleveland, Ohio. Anyone here from Cleveland? No. Cleveland, Ohio is my hometown. I'm very proud of Cleveland. I went to the Cleveland Institute of Art, which is a 5-year BFA, or was at the time. They've changed it now. I think it's 4 years. But directly across the street is the Cleveland Museum of Art, which some of you, I believe, have been to. The Cleveland Museum of Art is one of the greatest museums in America, or one of the great museums, I should say. And I had the luxury and the benefit of walking across the street, literally about 200 feet, every day for 5 years to see what's inside that great collection. And that was a tremendous experience, to see real art. And to this day, I still love museums. I love going to look at museums. I love looking at the real thing. This is the armor court inside the Cleveland Museum. It may have changed a little bit today, but that museum was like a mother. Just what it fed me, what it gave to me, how it inspired me, all the artists, to see them, and just to be able to wander the hallways. Like this drawing, October, this was inspired by the armor court in Cleveland. So it may have begun with small little statues of suits of armor, but I did want to create some sense of what I remembered from Cleveland, from that period. And these charcoal drawings, too, I might add, are done in a very pointillistic way. I don't have a slide of Seurat. It's one person I left out, but they do have a reference to kind of an optical mixing of gray, using the pencil without smearing, and trying to create something that's very vibrant in its surface. Now, getting back to Cleveland, it's a great collection. This writer, and it was the first time I got to see Albert Pinkham Ryder. Ryder didn't produce a lot of paintings in his lifetime. He was an American painter. And this is his picture, Death on a Pale Horse, which actually there's a story about this picture that supposedly a writer knew this waiter who wagered his life's earnings on a horse race and lost, and then ended up committing suicide. So it's kind of a grim story, but you know, he painted this picture of death on this horse riding eternally around this racetrack under this night sky. And if you see other of Ryder's pictures, it's the same thing, where there'll be not necessarily the skeleton on the horse, but you'll see nocturnes. You'll see the sense of mystery in a picture. And again, that's something that I find very appealing. Also in Cleveland, I was exposed to Charles Birchfield. And Birchfield is, again, another one of my inspirations. Birchfield actually attended the Cleveland School of Art before it became the Cleveland Institute of Art. And so he's an alumni of the same institution. And in a picture like this, his fondness for nature or his affinity with nature, I think of him as like an American Van Gogh. Just his sense of being in tune with nature, with animals, and even in a picture like this, how he depicts movement, how he depicts vitality, even how he depicts sound. You know, these radiating bands you see around the knotholes or coming off of things. Sometimes he'll use that to depict heat. He'll depict that to use sound of crickets chirping, or in this case birds singing, and they're just magical. It's a really incredible, he's an incredible artist. So in one of my drawings like this, the Cardinal Song, and this is something that's been coming up more and more in my work, this idea of radiation or bands that radiate outwards. They are meant to represent either light or sound, and in this case they are meant to represent sound, hence the title, the Cardinal Song. So the cardinal is centered right within the center of the moon, or is it the sun? It's probably the moon, could be the sun. I'm really not sure if it's the moon or the sun. But the radiation is light, but it's also music. It's also music emanating forth. The ukiyo-e is translated as the floating world. It's Japanese prints, 17th to 20th century in Japan. Very influenced by these works. The Cleveland Museum, as I mentioned, has a great Oriental collection. Sherman Lee, who was the director for a number of years, wrote what at the time was the definitive text on Oriental art. I'm not sure if that's still true. But the collection is just, you know, a joy to see, and especially works of the ukiyo-e, Hiroshige in particular. You know, it's no coincidence that a lot of the Impressionists collected ukiyo-e prints. Van Gogh, Monet, Manet. Actually, I didn't include it, but there's a copy of this exact print that Van Gogh did. Van Gogh was so inspired by this, he did more than one of Hiroshige's prints. But these are, you know, they could be a slice of life, but there's a manipulation of realism too. And in this case, this one looks very surreal to me, with the hawk or the eagle flying high above. And some, getting back down to earth, they can also be remnants of everyday life. You know, who has a cat? You know, have you seen them sitting by the window? Well, everyone does. You may not have Mount Fuji out the window. But this is such a beautiful print. I mean, if you love cats, it really reflects that. And I do have cats. We do love cats. And this is similar, or in the same vein. This is one of my drawings called Watcher, where, you know, you drive by, and my cats can't help but look out the window. In this case, this fellow is just sitting there looking out the window as well. That's right. Or in this piece, a house cat, where the cat, the poor little white kitty, is sitting up on the mountain all his own. In this one too, as I was mentioning about the radiation or the Birchfield influence, I'm becoming more and more interested in patterns as they create texture, visual texture, and overlapping those. So even though these are representational, I'm beginning to become more interested in somewhat of an abstraction of space and using these devices. So in this case, I don't know if you can make out the banding around the moon. There's a banding as well, the radiant lines, the texture of the house, the texture of the roof, the texture of the trees, and certainly the texture of the grass. And actually, a funny anecdote, I showed this to a friend who does landscaping, and when she looked at this picture, she said, the next time they cut the grass, have them cut it the other way. I said, okay, I will. Passing through, this is similar to the ukiyo-e idea of the transience of life, the transient nature of life, things passing through, passing by. As somebody said once, life is like a bird flying through one window and flying out the other. So just how fleeting life is and how temporal it is. That's what the attempt was in a picture like this. And if you notice, even the tomatoes on the windowsill, if you follow from left to right, are going from green to red. There's even a subtle progression of ripening. And we all know what happens after they ripen, right? Huh? I included this drawing because with the paintings, usually they work in tandem. I usually do a drawing first, and then I do the painting. The drawing is usually, it's preparatory, but it's not necessarily a study. And I do have some examples to show you of my process. But these do follow one another. There's sometimes very little variation, but the color changes everything once you get to the actual painting process. And then this piece called The Lake, which was inspired by an Edgar Allan Poe poem, actually titled The Lake. So a sense of mystery, or a sense of a sense of isolation, really, in a piece like this. Now, home and neighborhood, this is a great inspiration, too. One life-changing experience for me was when my wife and I adopted our daughter Annie when she was 4 months old, and this was in the fall of 1999. And it corresponded with my sabbatical. I had a sabbatical. So I got a tremendous amount of work done on my sabbatical, as well as, you know, getting to know my daughter. And what I would do is I would put her in this stroller and I would just walk around my neighborhood. And I don't know if it was just being a father for the first time, that things just took on a different reality. Things just looked different. So look at that house in the background. You know, walking around my neighborhood and looking at homes, I just started to see and get this deluge of ideas. So this house in the background actually turned into this picture. So walking by homes like this and finding a beauty in them I hadn't noticed before, and also setting up what-if scenarios. Like in the window, there is a tongue horse. You know, I thought there was a little bit of humor if you walked by, you know, a bungalow, you know, a suburban bungalow, and you saw this priceless piece of Chinese ceramics. I think you'd knock on the door and say, hey. But, and also, on Forest Park Boulevard, you can still see this home today. It's been upgraded a little bit, but this was on my one of my daily walks as well. And if you look on the door, you can see, I don't know if you can tell in the bottom left, but at Halloween, the woman who owned the home would put this cheesy little plastic or paper cat on the door. And I love the juxtaposition of this elegant Renaissance Revival home and this tacky little paper cat. So what I did, I would go home and I keep these sketchbooks, and the sketchbooks are really idea books. And when I say sketchbooks, you're used to people saying, oh, I sit down, I have to draw what's in front of me. For me, they're notations of ideas for pictures to come. And these go back 30 years, 30 plus years. So if you can see on this, it has the date, it has a quick note to myself, and really they're notes, and actually I find the cruder the notation, the better. And here I have a reference to the cat, I have a reference to the walkway, and what it evolved into was this picture called Trick or Treat, since it was done at that same time. So the house is lit up like a pumpkin. It's obviously at night. It invites you in to ring the doorbell, where you are greeted by the little tacky paper cat on the door. What are you going to find once you knock on the door? Beats me. Same thing with this one, the hedge between. The idea of, and I actually saw this once. I was returning some books to the library, and sometimes images just jump out at me. I just see them, and they're so, for lack of a better word, they're so odd that it grabs me, and it really makes me stop and think about it. So I actually saw this, just like the previous picture. And I love the idea of the duality of the two neighbors. And anyone who has a home, and you have to deal with neighbors. And I grew up in the suburbs in Cleveland. Actually, I grew up in the city, then we moved to the suburbs. And suburbs have a life of their own, so suburban life, and even the kind of class warfare, if you want to call it that, between the people who have a pool and those who don't have a pool. The elegant above-ground blue pool, which I happen to actually find very beautiful. I love those things, and so I had to put in the picture. But again, symmetry, look at the clouds, even those match one another, so keeping along the same vein. This is somewhat biographical foursquare. I do live in a foursquare, and this is very similar to the home I live in. I do grow sunflowers in the summertime sometimes, and they'll reach about 15 feet tall. I think these may be a little bit higher if you follow the scale. Radioactive sunflowers. But there is, this is pretty much depicting where I live lovingly. I'm trying to be respectful of where I live and of the environment, and even the sense of heat too. The sense of the oppressive heat in the summer, the sun, the pink sky. So this is a depiction or a slice of life of what I'm used to. Or even this painting's garage sale. And in a picture like this too, there's nothing really of value inside the garage sale if you look closely. A shovel, a tire, some old clothes, hose, and it is meant to depict the, as I mentioned earlier, the transitory nature of life and what we value, and the angel even up on the weather vane is intentional to remind us that all life is fleeting, and what you have here is not going to last forever. You're not going to keep it forever. And this piece as well, the boulevard. I do live on a boulevard, so just like the previous piece. And I also wanted to depict wet cement, if that's an intention for doing a painting, depicting wet cement. But my colleague Audrey owns this painting, so I'm happy that she has this. Glider, this is a charcoal drawing, same thing. This is a neighbor's home. I see this every day, and I wondered, what if you put a child's toy up there? And there is a little bit of an ominous sense of going up those stairs to retrieve it. If you were a child, you would really hesitate. You would think twice. You don't know what's behind the bushes. And I think finally, the glean, this is a charcoal drawing. We do have a lot of rabbits, since my cat has to stay inside. My cat used to go outside. We didn't have as many rabbits. Now we have a lot of rabbits. So this is an attempt to make an environmental statement, but I think it does, nonetheless, with the houses in the background, man infringing upon nature, or even the sawtooth-like quality of the houses bearing down on the poor little bunnies. But when I thought of this, I couldn't help but think of Millet's gleaners. Same idea. They're gleaning just as much as the bunnies are. So hence the title. So the titles will refer back at times to other works of art that I find meaningful. Now, religious themes I might throw in. When I grew up in Cleveland, my parents were not into the arts at all, quite far from it. My father worked in the steel mills in Cleveland for 40 years. My mother was a housewife. I took no art training. I had it in Catholic school, went to parochial school, went to Catholic church, went to Mass 6 days a week. And so the first and probably the most impressionable form of art I had, or experience of art I had, was from liturgical art, and what I saw in church, like this icon here. My colleague could tell me who did it. Who did that? The Florence Baptistry. It's the mosaic in the Florence Baptistry. Thank you. But I love this, and again, maybe this is where my fondness for symmetry comes in. That seeing an image like this every day reinforce that idea of right down the center, you've got the two sides mirroring one another. So I did a painting, or you'll see this image occur again and again, or this the use of religious signs. Some are overt, like this one. This is a reference when Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Or sometimes it's not as obvious. And I'll show you that in a few pictures to come. I'm also interested in using contemporary settings to depict religious themes. Like, in this case, Bruegel's painting of the blind leading the blind is obviously set in 16th century, is it the Netherlands? In the 16th century Netherlands. Look at the church in the background. And I love that idea of using something that has, it's not setting it in first century or in a later time period, but it's setting it in a contemporary setting. So this is my Annunciation, or attempt at an Annunciation image. So if you see, there's the angel Gabriel in the center of the picture. Mary is off to the bottom right reading a book. And it's up for grabs who's on the left. It could be Joseph. It could be the neighbor. I don't know. But the formal garden, suburbia, or I should say suburban-looking homes, very American. So it's not set in first century. It's set in a very contemporary setting. And I love that idea. This is the vine grower. Now, I'm going to quiz you. Can anybody figure out what this is about? This is a biblical reference. It's a story from the Bible. A little pop quiz. I wonder if anybody can tell me.
Jonah.
Jonah. Bingo. Yeah, very good. It's from the book of Jonah. When Jonah sits up on a hill, he's waiting for Nineveh to be destroyed, and he sets up a little shelter. And then God sends a vine, and the vine covers his shelter. And Jonah's very happy, he's very pleased with himself, until God sends the worm. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, I don't know if you can make it out, but there is a little worm who's about to eat the vine, about to devour the vine. But obviously that's not Nineveh, that looks more like little tract homes. And actually it's an attempt at a self-portrait too. It doesn't look fully like me, but it's, I do grow vines too. I do grow morning glories, so a little bit of a self-portrait there as well. Keeping along the same lines as the Bruegel, Conrad Witz, I don't know what else he did, but not much else. Thank you, Kirsten. My colleague Kirsten is the expert. I love this painting. I absolutely love this. Where is this, by the way?
It's in Geneva.
It's in Geneva. Have you seen it?
No.
Really? I really want to see this picture. I love this painting, and it's the same idea where it's the background. Look at the background. I mean, that's Switzerland. You've got the homes up on stilts. You've got the bridges, the landscape, but obviously first century fishermen and Christ. That very imposing figure of Christ in red is so compelling. It's such a beautiful image, such a striking image. So keeping along the same lines in my own work, Great with Child, this was done around Christmas time. Friends we have down the street, the young woman was pregnant, and she would take these daily walks up and down the street. And again, a what-if scenario, what if Mary and Joseph were walking up and down the street? So that home actually exists. It's directly across the street from us. So using that home and then putting people in this case, first century garb, walking down the street. I love that contrast. I love that idea of taking something you're familiar with, but trying to change it or update it. And again, I think that's the thrill artists have found for centuries of, I shouldn't say thrill, but the challenge for years of using classical subjects, because everyone brings something different to them. Look at how the church was such a patron, and Caravaggio's paintings are different than Rembrandt's, the religious themes, or anyone who does them today. So there's a wealth of information there. Or in this case, this is my interpretation of the expulsion from the garden. That's why it's called Barred. The angel standing at the gate with the flaming sword. It's also a piece of statuary, I might add, but it's trying to depict that idea of the expulsion. Now, I do want to show you a little bit about sketch to art. As I mentioned, I do keep these sketchbooks, and things begin very crudely. Actually, the cruder the better. And the reason why, I used to do sketches and then develop them and then do the painting, and then the painting would never turn out to have the vitality or the energy of the sketch. So I found the cruder the sketch, the better. So if you look at here, you'll see this picture of what's supposed to be, those vertical things are actually candles, which it turned into this image. It starts to clarify itself a little bit more. Candles on a windowsill. It's still rather crude, so I'm working out color. You can see up in the corner notations of size. At one point I called it vigil, and then it's developed even further. So it goes through this process. And I might add also that ideas will rest in my notebook for years. Sometimes I'll see something and jot it down, and then not come back to it for years later. So there's a gestation period, and I have hundreds of images that will probably never see the light of day. I hope so, but they probably won't. But anyways, that image turned into this. I changed the name from Vigil to Awake. So there's one, if you look in the background at the homes, there's only one house with its lights on, besides the candles being seen from the foreground. So who's really awake? that's how it started. And here are 2 pages from my sketchbook again. And you can see the randomness too. Sometimes I'll cut out pieces of paper and glue them into my sketchbook. And then the bottom right-hand corner, let me blow that up for you, is this picture of the gate. And the finished drawing does not does not change very much from the original. You can still sense this composition, but the narrow gate, everything angling down to the evergreen beyond the narrow gate. Or in this case, you can see some of these images I'll never use. Again, the bottom right, I want to show you this image. This was taken from a Tenebrae Vespers. In our church, the church I attend, St. Paul's downtown, on Tenebrae is Latin for darkness. So they do a darkness service on Good Friday. So on Good Friday, the Passion story is read and the lights are extinguished in the church. And one year, this I think was before daylight savings time, the bats started coming out. The church is 175 years old, which my daughter will always remember. It was such a wonderful event that I had to commemorate in some way. So Tenebrae, the story behind that is really, the church, the sacristy, and then the bats coming out, joyfully flocking around. So there are bats in the belfry, I might add. This image on the right, I think I saw it in the newspaper, and this will happen many times. As I said, I'll be driving by, I'll see something, and an image just jumps out. Or in this case, looking through newspapers, I saw this image of a comb. And I think it says what? A comb from the dating 870, the Roman medallion, with the Roman medallion. But when I saw that, I didn't see a comb. I saw, well, you'll see what I saw. I saw a fish. I saw a fish with its mouth open, because it has a kind of a reference to looking like something's gaping, something's opening up. And here I saved this image from a 9 Lives ad, turned it sideways. And I was thinking of doing a story, and it turned into this. So from the start, from that one photograph, it ended up as this, which again is the story of Jonah, which I happen to love that story. But instead of depicting it in an illustrative way, I wanted to know how could I do it more as an allegory. So the fish became a vase form. I don't know if you can tell the eye on the right side, the mouth, there's a suggestion of gills on the left, and then the figure sinking down to the bottom, looking more corpse-like than anything, is Jonah before he was swallowed by the whale. Or he could be, technically he is inside the whale, or the fish, technically it's a fish, before being vomited out. And Christ said it was a pre-foreshadowing of his own resurrection, hence the sunflowers coming out. As I mentioned about influenced by art, this painting by David, is it Madame Recamier? Is that how you say it? Recamier. Say that again? Recamier. This has always been a compelling image, and here you'll see on the right the sketch, again, flipping through a newspaper, seeing this ad for a couch, and I started thinking of that painting, because you can't help, look at those round pillows, you can't help but think of this painting, or I couldn't help but think of this painting. So, and I might add also, I had, this is an image that I had begun when I first arrived in Fort Wayne, and I destroyed the image. It's the only time I've ever started a painting, and I was about 3/4 of the way through the painting, and I threw it away. And there are reasons I'm not going to get into why I threw it away. Chucked it in the dumpster, and I've never done that. Never done that since, and I never will. There's something about struggling through a work of art that I find very valuable. But there were things going on, so it haunted me so much that I destroyed that piece of art that I went back to it years later. I think this is in 1990 or 2000, I believe. And I did this drawing, and it's titled Insomnia. So the drawing, you can see, has a very floral border. It has the woman sitting on the couch, and I've included, unlike the David, I've included the pumpkin patch out the window. And she does have somewhat of a classical look to her, but that then turned into this painting. So it started from a magazine ad, through the sketch, referencing David, ending up as this painting titled Insomnia. And this does have a reference to life and death with the pumpkins, the graveyard in the background, and the condition of the woman. And then this may be one of the last one, but this, I have to give credit to my daughter. You know, having children, you know, they're wonderful artists. If you look at the image in the bottom right, this, I believe, was a gift card to and from. But I love the idea of the bat and the house, that context. So I have to admit, and I'll confess in public, that I did steal from my daughter. What did Picasso say about stealing?
Good artist.
Good artist steal, thank you. But I should really change the title of this and give credit to my daughter, which now I think I will have to. I'm obligated to. But it did go from her idea to this finished piece. And this is a more recent drawing. And I did have an exhibition here at IPFW, and this was on the poster. And this is combining all those previous elements of concentric lines, of movement, smoke, sound, all together. Now, whether or not these will become paintings, I really don't know. In the past, I had worked in tandem where I had created drawings first and then done paintings afterwards, but I'm not sure if these will ever become paintings. I think they might just end up as drawings. New York, New York, as Audrey said, my colleague Audrey Yushenko, I've been fortunate to be connected to Denise Bibro, who's a dealer in Chelsea in New York City since 1998. I had my first one-man show there, which was still a thrill. New York City, in the words of Lou Reed, is the place where. Yeah, no one else gets that. But that's from Walk on the Wild Side, by the way. But New York is still the art center of the world, where the magazines are, the critics are, the curators are, and to be able to show New York is a wonderful experience. I've had 5 shows at Denise. Her gallery is located in Chelsea. Chelsea's famous for the Hotel Chelsea, of course. Here's a map of New York. Denise is located on West 20th between 9th and 10th Avenue, so it's a little west towards the Hudson River. And actually, most of you think of Soho, Soho being popular, 20 years ago or more. But Denise has since moved. It's been about 15 years Denise has moved to Chelsea. And a lot of galleries since then have moved to the Chelsea area. This gives you a sense of where the Village is and Chelsea. Just a bunch of warehouses, basically. But the rents drove people out of Soho. My last show was 3 years ago, so I'm about due for another show. But these are shots from that opening. And I was fortunate that many of my colleagues were able to make the trip in. Actually, I'm in the center here talking to a recent grad, Jason Stopa, who has since gone on to get his MFA from Pratt and is working as an art critic and editor in New York City. But you can see in the background, this is a typical what the gallery space looks like, you know, an exhibition, the opening. And as I said, I was fortunate that my colleagues were able to join this show. Julie Wall, former student, is on the left. Sayaka Gans, who's our colleague, wonderful sculptor, is on the right. It's a very funny picture. But this also gives you a sense of scale of the work. So exhibiting in New York is quite a privilege, and I'm very happy to have that opportunity to do that. And finally, I'd like to say that I am inspired by what I do and who I'm with, which means I'm inspired by my colleagues and I'm inspired by teachers, or by my students, I should say. This is a photograph from a recent summer trip to Europe. This past summer, a year ago, a group of us led by our fearless leader in the red hoodie, Dana Goodman. Dana is on the far left, and here we are in front of Stonehenge. But I was able to go to Dublin, we went to Wales, we went to what am I leaving out? London and then Paris. And I was teaching a drawing class. Dana taught an art history class. And so people were taking it for various reasons. But it was a wonderful experience. But just being around students and teaching is a great learning experience for me as well. Dana, I might add, as he said in his intro, I'm as inspired by his work and by his work ethic. And as a colleague, you couldn't ask for a better colleague. Same thing goes for these two. Audrey Yushenko I've known for 30 years, and she's probably one of the most influential mentors I've had as a painter, showing me how to do an art career, how to work, how to be disciplined about your work, how to take it seriously. And then Christopher Gantz, colleague as well, one of the greatest draftsmen I've ever known, one of the greatest drawing teachers you'll ever have, if anyone's interested. So they were at the opening as well. This is a great shot. I love this picture. Robert Schrader, I'd like to give credit to as well. Bob has been a champion from the Fort Wayne Museum to more recently with my show here in Fort Wayne. Tireless, selfless, and a wonderful artist, a wonderful sculptor. I'm very proud to have him as a friend. And finally, and last but not least, is my wife, Nancy McCroskey. This is a painting I did of Nancy in 1995, and it's titled A Muralist because Nancy is known for doing large-scale murals, and what she would do, and I caught her doing this one day in the studio, she'll do the tiles, they're made of ceramic tiles, she'll lay them out on the floor, and then she'll get up on a ladder to look at them to get a better view of what they look like from above. As it, you know, it's much more challenging if they were to be propped up. So the idea of the ladder is really practical. That's really how she sees things. So on that note, you know, that hopefully sums up who and what I do. Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate your time.